Creatives, community, kind folks out there, hello. Welcome to RPG with DBJ. Today is Monster Monday, and thank you for joining me. I'll preamble just a little bit just before we get started into today's theme, which is mountain monsters. Anyway, last week had some fits and starts and bad connection issues. I was away from home. I was trying to live stream in places that I was familiar with, kind of seat of the pants and whatnot. So a lot of that had to do with where I was and what I was doing. But I was down, left Central Ohio, went down into Atlanta, then down into the Gulf side of Florida. So it was a little bit odd and not exactly my normal streaming. So now that I'm back home, I can't guarantee that we won't have all those problems, but I will guarantee that all those problems that happen will probably be my fault. So I'm back home. So thank you for joining me. Rickard, what's going on? Rickard says, so monsters that live in mountains, monsters that are living mountains, and monsters that scare mountains? All the above. All right. So one thing, full disclosure, I am a contributing writer to Critical Hit Publishing, and we have some things that are in the works and probably coming out soon and that kind of thing. And I really don't promote a lot of that stuff. And I said, man, well, how do I tell you guys about it? But I really don't want to cram it down your throat. And I was like, wait a minute, I do these darn cinematic environment books, so I kind of can bring the two together. So I thought I would talk about, well, the environment, and then wrap it around all of our weekly subjects. So this week, last week was wetlands, swamps, bogs, that kind of thing. This week we're going to talk about mountains and kind of like just dissect them a little bit and have some fun with them, and maybe even, I don't know, go down some creative paths with it. So today, for those who don't know, we pick a weekly theme. Usually at random, or someone in the chat will say something and it'll spark some idea in my head, and I'll go, oh, that's a great idea. Boom, we're going to do that. And then each day has its own theme as well. So Monster Monday, Tips and Tricks Tuesday, World Building Wednesday, and so on. So let's get into it. So Rickard says, like, rock slide monster, rocks fall, everyone dies. Yeah, the classic DM that really hates their players is like, yeah, the rocks fall on your head, everyone dies. Save versus death, that's what is it? I think that's one of the it's Tomb of Horrors module. You, before you even begin the game, you go into one of the fake tunnels or whatever, and you walk inside and you roll a die and go, yep, and 1d4 players instantly die, something to that effect. All right, so mountains. All right, so what is it that we can play with mountains? Okay, so the first thing that comes to mind, especially when it comes to medieval gaming, we've got ourselves everything from earth elementals to our dwarven kings sitting inside of their mountain habitats, stone giants, and those sorts of things. Of course, we have ourselves modern day to sci-fi, huge mountains like Olympus Mons on Mars and things like that. Yeah, you gotta, Rickard says trolls. Yeah, you gotta throw some trolls in there. And the cool thing about mountains is that we can very, very easily combine our deep earthen treachery that comes about, whether it's drowls and trolls or troglodytes and those things that are deep down into the underworld, as well as combining them with our aerial creatures, griffins and pegasi and gargoyles and any kind of winged creature that's a high altitude kind of thing, and play with the idea of maybe there's an hierarchy in terms of, creatures from the underworld rising to the surface, because who's to say that, your subterranean culture doesn't come up to the surface through a lake or an ocean, but they can also go high, high into the mountains, into the thinner air, cold temperatures and things. Rickard says Nordic mountain trolls. Yeah, more Nordic mountain trolls. As a matter of fact, you can even play with the idea of the temperatures. For example, if you take a look at um, most pictures of photographers taking pictures of mountains, you'll notice that a lot of those mountains are snow-capped, even if the bottom portions are full of foliage and forested areas and such. So the higher the altitude, the colder and the thinner the air. And if you really want to start playing with it, you could even kind of like mix in some of your Arctic creatures, winter wolves and yeti and what are those things called? Ramarazes with the hot glowing bellies. What's another creature? It's a Arctic creature. But anyway, you could play with those and then start reskinning a ton of them, putting some wings on some trolls maybe, or having a sort of thickly coated type of creature like the snow owls. They're white feathered creatures that are able to survive in Arctic regions and also fly through the air. So you could combine those together as well. Maybe even elemental creatures or your stone giants having either fur or being covered in snow when they're not moving. So maybe they're like hiding in the not necessarily trying to sneak upon people, but maybe they just don't move around a lot and they hide in the rock and crevices and such, and they're covered with snow. So anyway, we could in our monsters for our mountainous monsters encase them in our mountains, in our setting, and each mountain itself could be its own culture, subterranean culture, or external culture living in and amongst the mountains. Now, we can't forget to take a ton of ideas from our current cultures, such as the peoples who live in like high altitudes. There are people that live in high altitudes in, off the top of my head, in Mexico and the Himalayas, and I know in Peru and places like that. Lots of people that live in high altitudes are used to the cold temperatures and barren landscape, and they may take with them goats and other llamas and animals that are like not just herd animals, but also are labor animals, able to supply them with food, carry supplies, give them warmth through either them being alive and just being warm near their bodies, or killing them for their food and their bones, and of course their hide, and using them to cover themselves. And that might be a value to your group of Goliaths that live in certain mountain areas. Tesla Ranger brings up eagles, giant eagles, rocks. Absolutely. You can go for those winged creatures as well, like griffins, hippogriffs, sphinxes, and things, and just reskinning them. Maybe even applying a kind of like a family to them. So you could say, well, the eagles and the giant eagles and some of their other mutations might be because they live up there, or maybe there's a wizard, of course, that's up living in the mountains, maybe even trying to pierce the sky, or find a way to the elemental plane of air, and almost as if they want to get to the very peak of the mountain and step off the top of the mountain and ascend into the elemental plane of air. And maybe that's their way of doing it, and maybe modifying some of these creatures along the way. Pelora, thank you for joining. Pelora says, makes me think of Smaug in the gold, the hiding in the snow. Absolutely. Those of you who have seen the last episode of Game of Thrones, there was a dragon hiding in ash that kind of looked like snow. And why not do that? Rickard says, rust monsters? I mean, there are a lot of metal ore in some mountains, and they scare that shit out of old school players. Oh yeah. Rust monsters even could be used as, I could imagine rust monsters being used by a tribalists that might not be your classic dwarves that are mining ore, but literally using them to carve out caves or allow them to make a um, by the rust monsters removing the ore, maybe it makes the rock softer for them to manipulate because in like maybe the higher elevations, that harder rock and granite is very tough. Oh, Zymock, change the name. You're perfectly fine, man. You're all right. Um, I'm going with Pelora as I'm looking at your icon there. Oh, kind of cute. All right, so the Ricker says, "Wow, rust monsters used by a mining operation to sniff out the ore veins." Uh, I think that makes perfect sense. I mean, sure, they might be eating a little bit of your merchandise, as it were, but rust monsters, tribalists riding on the back of rust monsters. I mean, think about it. Rust monsters aren't necessarily uh, aggressive or evil unless it comes to, of course, getting rid of that metal ore, that iron, well, not necessarily iron, but metal ore. So maybe they're eating like tin and small trace elements, but they're probably very great at divining where some of those big veins are. So I could see that. And of course, if you're a tribalist, you don't need to rely on metal. Wood, bone, leather, though a lot of those things could be extremely useful for you, especially if you're just, maybe a tribe of 50 or so, just hanging up in the mountains and such. And remember, uh, um, the new pig truffle finder. Yeah, absolutely. Just riding on the back of them, like raising them, maybe even having them domesticated, riding on the back of them like turtles or something. And of course, people that live in mountains, the the cool thing and kind of the harder thing to do is to imagine our monsters in their setting in a vertical environment as opposed to a horizontal one. So while we understand that climbing mountains is a vertical feat and your PCs might fall to their deaths, of course. Oh, and thanks for the thumbs. They may fall to their deaths. Trying to design, especially even in theater of the mind, but especially even on paper, most of us aren't very good artists anyway. To try to design a vertical environment with like switchbacks and cliff faces and ledges and all those kind of things would be cool and kind of difficult, but I still think it would be a very, very awesome environment to use. Dead Man the Storyteller says dire rust monsters. Heck yeah. Oh man. Yeah, always it loves eating those silver plated knights with the crunchy on the outside and soft on the inside. Especially if you ramp up their sizes too. Ooh, you could maybe even riding on the backs of rust monsters that can hold, you know, 10, 15, 30 individual riders. So that might be it. I mean, why not? And even have small rust monsters that fit in the palm of your hand, little kids raising them, painting their backs, marking them with chalk or something like that. Rickard says, imagine them breaking loose from their wooden enclosures and wreaking havoc on the mining operation, eating all the ore, more gluttonous than aggressive. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I imagine the rust monsters will probably be, like I say, they're probably not aggressive in terms of wanting to kill people, but they're probably more gluttonous. I could imagine them stampeding and walking over things, and more or less a comedy of errors as everyone's trying to like corral them back in their wooden enclosures while they start eating at the piles of ore that they spent months gathering and such. Yeah. Pelora says, better go and get the haze killers, the Mistborn. I don't. What do you say? Like the gaming, the living gaming version of like a bug spray. That's kind of you guys are silly. Uh, but yes, absolutely. So okay, so we got ourselves like a culture. Maybe there are other beings inside of the mountains that like I can imagine a mountain being like a hive inside of the mountain with lots of tunnels and things of that nature. Um, but also one of the things that we can really play with when it comes to using our mountains, and I think it's a little bit underserved as well, because you know me, I've got to throw in some of the environment and such, is the fact that of course you always have the fear of falling. And yes, players are going to they are going to use ropes and cables and attach themselves and probably spell-like abilities like spider walk, spider climbing, or whatever, magic items and such. But that fear of falling, even if it's only a temporary setback, I think is something that is should be and could be an extreme threat. And especially attached to that is the fact that you know if you're in the mountains, you're going to have like your kobolds, you know, cause rock slides, your stone giants causing rock slides, your gnomes and dwarves that have their mountainous kingdoms are going to defend themselves with rock slides and such. And in addition, they're going to have you absolutely positively reskin and reflavor a lot of your traps and even like spell-like effects. So, for example, an area might just naturally be subject to rock slides or collapsing pillars or something like that. Or it might be that the sentient creatures there know that this place is prone to it, and they use that as a way to corral invaders, or it might be specifically set up that way. So normally it's not subject to that, but the people there have carved away small areas so that all they have to do is just move little chocks to create these rock slides and such. But there's other things you can play with as well that I'll go into. Rickard says, quote, we need some extra hands to help with small issues in the mind. Don't worry about it. It's not dangerous. Think of it as herding cats. PCs show up to mine and have 12 rust monsters running them. I love it. I love that. I mean, the piece. Hey, that rust monsters are one of probably the top five. Like they're not they're not massively powerful creatures, but PCs absolutely hate them because they're all outfitted with everything from metal belt buckles to that +5 flaming Vorpal Holy Avenger that the paladins got on their back, and they're just like, what the? I'm getting the hell out of here. Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Now, mind you, depending on the setting, though, if your setting is more tribalist, this probably doesn't even matter. But yes, absolutely. Ricker says they deal 1d4 damage, so really not a problem with damage output. Yep, I agree with you. And honestly, if you remember, if we're professionals, right? If we're role playing Rust Monsters, that 1d4 damage is probably more of a like, leave me alone. I'm trying to eat this metal here. Um, oh man. The Dead Man Storyteller says the druid isn't. Yeah, as in the druid doesn't isn't panic. Well, it depends on what kind of druid they are. I I would absolutely embrace the fact if a PC says that they want to be like a dwarven druid and they want to be extremely like earth elemental, and that they might either befriend or have as a small familiar or acquire this rust monster pet or something, I would go with it. I mean, it okay. The thing is that something's only game breaking if you allow the game to break. So sure, why not? I mean, and the thing is that if we want to have ourselves a living organic world, it's not like there's only one rust monster in the entire world. I'm sure there are probably hordes of them, or people growing them like we're talking about now, or I guess they grow in hives. I don't think there's any I'm sure there's an ecology for rust monsters, but I mean, are they insectoid? Sure, maybe they grow in hives. Are they more armadillo mammal-ish, turtle-ish? Who knows? uh, Ricker says, leave me alone. I'm trying to eat that yummy candy bar you're trying to whack me over the head with. Come on. Yum, 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 yum. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm thinking that rust monsters are pretty, I mean, they're pretty single-minded. At least the concept that you get from them, that they're pretty docile, probably don't want to be bothered too much, and they'll probably strike. You hit them, they hit you back. They'll probably try to gnaw at your hand to get you away from them. But other than that, they're probably just out there chewing. And I'm sure the the handlers of the rust monsters are probably pretty good about maybe if you're riding on the back of a rust monster, I can imagine a concept of the farmer or whoever riding on the back with a big stick and then a string, and tied on the end of the string is like a gold bar, or like a coin with the hole through it, and then it's like dangling just like a foot ahead of the rust monster and just leading it around by its nose. That's be funny. So all right, so we got ourselves a culture. Maybe there are, this mining culture. There's raising these rust monsters. They have maybe some of the other regions have other creatures like trolls, stone giants, what have you, maybe living in the other mountains, and they have their own cultures there. And along the way, of course, we have. I mean, you can apply so many things up in the mountains, from crumbling cliffs to stone expanses. Maybe there's like, how you can get like wind and erosion and ice runoff, so that you could have stone bridges, the natural stone bridges that lead from one region to another, or maybe even rope bridges that are attached from across these very deep but close valleys, and having your cultures live up in there. There's also, sometimes we like to think of our environments as being very I'm trying to think of the right word, not monolithic, but mono environments, right? So what I mean by that is that even in a mountainside, right, you can have lakes, you can have frozen rivers, or even waterfalls that are like frozen if you want to go with a cold mountain. Of course, there's high winds, blizzards, snow, the shifting of air currents and such. So you can play with that if you want to add some of those little bit of hazards in there when your players confront some of your monsters, maybe like yetis or gargoyles or something like that up in the mountains. And it could be like we were talking about. Rickard says mountain tentacle monsters a la Dora de Moria. Yes, absolutely. Who's to say that there's not something living up in there? I've often thought of calderas, basically a volcano filled with water at the top. You could have an entire community. You could have an entire lake side community built around the interior of a caldera. Basically a volcano filled with water, and just have, I could imagine PCs being maybe pirates or something, and having Deadman says the Watcher in the water. That tentacle creature, although I'm sure I don't remember the origin of that creature, but yeah, why not? Why wouldn't something like that live there? You can throw in some aquatic creatures. As a matter of fact, although we're going to do subterranean on a different week, there's nothing stopping any of your aquatic creatures from living in mountain streams, rivers, subterranean lakes, aquifers. Aquifers exist in subterranean regions, basically a pocket of water completely surrounded by stone. So we're, fantasy, science fiction, whatever have you, aquatic creatures can live in there too. And mixing and matching some of their elements. For example, it could just be a regular, like, I don't want to go with Kraken, but Kraken seems to be the thing that's coming off the top of my head. It could exist inside of an aquatic realm up in the mountains, maybe large mountainous lakes and such, or maybe it freezes over time, and that's why the creature doesn't leave. Maybe it goes into like a hibernation during the long winters, but for the 3 months when the sun finally reaches the peaks of the mountains and starts to do the spring melt, maybe this creature is able to attack something. So maybe it lives there. But other than just a normal tentacled suction cup creature, it could be, you could reskin it as if it's stone and just make it just thing with just big stony arms or hands or something that reaches out and grabs things, just like you could do the same thing with a dragon or what's something. I'm trying to think of something that's not earthen that you could reskin as earthen. Oh, can't forget ourselves some golems as well. I know our iron golems would pee their pants if they got surrounded by some rust monsters. But yes, golems, stone golems, clay golems, you could absolutely throw into your as monsters into your mountainous regions. Of course, they could literally be golems that were created by people and left up in the mountains. Maybe a dwarf them thousands of years ago to be watchers in an area, or maybe they're just, you don't call them golems, you just use their stat blocks and they just happen to exist up in the high mountain regions. Now, another thing too to think about is the fact that maybe there are mountain cultures that use the high altitudes. Maybe they have kites or wings or glider wings or hot air balloons. Trying to think of something aerial. Even airships. You could go slightly spelljammer, very slightly, with airships or some other mechanism. Maybe even, of course, you have yourself some flying mounts, and they can fly between the mountain peaks and the valleys and such, and really add in an extra layer of problems for your PCs, especially if they see there's a dwarven culture and the PCs are like, oh, okay, well, they're just dwarves. And all of a sudden the dwarves just like jump off the edge of the cliff and start like landing on the backs of, I don't know, winged goats or something. And your PCs are like, oh, I won't be able to reach that with my flaming Vorpal sword, can I? As the dwarves start throwing down rocks upon their heads. Undo, hey, what's going on? It says, in one of the highest lakes in Colombia, tribes dropped gold statues as offerings and also punished people by making them stay in the freezing waters and be judged by the gods. I love the fact that you threw that in there, because there's plenty, pointing out the fact that there's plenty of things in our own real life cultures that we can pick from, and that's specifically what I'm talking about. I didn't know that, but I love it as well, that gold statues dropped in lakes and freezing water. I love that, and I feel like you could pull a ton of ideas from that. Why would they do that? Of course, in our fantasy gaming and in our role playing, the gods most likely are real, or maybe they used to be real, and there could be other aspects of that. For example, maybe the mountains are surrounded by the undead, like ghosts or zombies or some other kind of undead left out there in the freezing cold, and that's how they got that way, punished by the gods to wander the upper cold regions forever. It could be that the gold statues have now arisen, or maybe they remain in the frigid waters and pull people down. I mean, there's any number of reasons, or maybe that's just where we know where the gold's at. And the people were like, you're not taking those gold statues out of that water at all. And matter of fact, we're probably going to push you down in those lakes and get this darn lake frozen over if we have anything to do with it, right? Pelora says goats are good at mountains. Maybe satyrs are too. Yeah, satyrs. You might want to throw in some minotaurs in there if you are the type that likes to think of cyclopses, cyclopsi, as the cyclops is having cloven hooves. Maybe that's another thing as well. And who's to say that they aren't extremely agile at maintaining their balance? And nobody wants to be like I've mentioned before, some people are like, well, the knockdown shove maneuver in D&D is useless. Yeah, but if you're on a 5-foot ledge and you get head butted into your gonads by a goat, to, now tell me what's going to happen when you take a 60-foot fall down onto a ledge, crack your back, and then start to fall another 180 feet or something. Yeah, let that happen. But I absolutely agree. Why not mountain satyrs? And what a great way to include centaurs. Your centaurs don't need to be equine. They don't need to be horse-like. They could be goat-like. As a matter of fact, your satyrs and or centaurs could be halfling sized. So you could have halfling sized centaurian goat-like people. I think that would make perfect sense. As a matter of fact, you could even go tiefling in your setting, and instead of them having an infernal heritage from fiendish creatures, they could have a fey-like or goat-like origin, or they could be biological and just have a satyr slash goat origin and just happen to have come from the mountains. They're just mountain people. Or they could have a fey origin to them, and then they just happen to have cloven hooves. But that depends on your setting. Some people like their tieflings with tails and cloven hooves, some don't. But that's all based on setting. Plora goes on to say, it would make a pretty safe place for a species that can just walk around like it's nothing, but your average person is going to need climbing gear to move around. I absolutely agree with you. As a matter of fact, there are quite a number of daily. Okay, the Grand Canyon. In the Grand Canyon, there are a number of tours where people get on the backs of like mule trains, and they ride on the backs of mules, and it takes them up and down the very sheer sides in the Grand Canyon. Now, the mules are completely comfortable being hundreds of feet in the air, doing little switchback turns and such. But the people riding on the mules, like me, just thinking about it makes my personables want to contract up inside of me. So yes, your average person going up into the mountains needs special climbing gear, a set of brass ones, both for ladies and men, and anyone, right? So yeah, that's when your PCs are like, what, we've got to go up there? Like, are you kidding me? Whereas the natural species just like, I live in a horizontal world. It's not a big deal to me. And that very well could be the difference between, when the PCs confront the mountain invading horde on the flat lands, maybe the PCs have more of an advantage. But when they go up in those mountains, you better watch out. Now, of course, Third Pillar Thursday, that's where we're going to talk about like falling and those kind of, not just simple falling, but the ramifications of falling. Are you dangling by your fingertips? Do you fall and get stunned? Do you fall and hit outcrops? I mean, most cliff faces are not exactly sheer. They're usually angled because a mountain is like a peak. It's a big triangle, right? And once you start going up in those areas, they're pretty jagged and made up of lots of different faces and such. So it's possible that falling could be a compound thing. So someone can fall and hit a ledge and maybe fall off of that ledge and then hit another ledge. And there's also the idea of adding in other kinds of hazards. That'll be for Third Pillar Thursday. But I do agree with you, Pelora, that the idea of having these people who are very used to climbing and balancing on very narrow areas. And remember, I'm saying narrow because I'm scared, right? A 10-foot ledge to me is, let's just say that the ratio of ledge to distance down makes it feel like the ledge itself is that much smaller, right? A 10-foot ledge when you're only 3 feet off the ground is nothing. A 10-foot ledge when you're 300 feet off the ground feels like you're standing on a piece of thread, right? So narrow is a relative thing. I maybe the better descriptor would be handrails, because we you know, in our both on our fantasy and our sci-fi, um, the handrail people, they seem to forget the technology to create handrails, and I'm not sure where the handrail crafts people have gone, but they seem to have disappeared in this weird dystopian these weird dystopian realms. So yeah, my thing is I would love a spell of create handrail, if you ask me. Um, but anyway, all right. So we play with some creatures that we can add some wings to creatures. So we have our aerial and our earthen thing. We can add in some. Of course, we have our aquatic creatures. But since we're talking about the elements, there's also the elemental plane of fire. And of course, when it comes with fire, we have ourselves volcanoes. And there isn't any restriction on volcanoes being high up in altitudes in Arctic regions, which is a great thing to play with as well, especially when your players are both um, scared of falling, freezing to death, and then may boil to death and turn to charcoal when a live volcano wants to randomly spew and spray lava or hot timbers or hot molten ore up into the air and having it pouring down the mountainside. And that might be how some of the creatures, some of your species live in and around these regions. For example, maybe those rust monsters are the ones that they're using to dig away enough ore so that they can pour the volcanic, the molten volcanic interior of the volcano can pour in certain locations, much as you can imagine, like a dwarven forge, and the lava pours down into a region where they're able to separate out the important elements and such. And maybe those rust monsters are the things that help them dig their way around. Now, of course, we have some other creatures like purple worms, um, the Zorn, which is an earth elemental styled creature. Of course, I'm brought up earth elementals. Of course, I think there's even earth elemental Jin and some other earthy type creatures. And what we can play with, of course, with when it comes to mountain regions, when I was talking about horizontal and vertical living, maybe some of your PCs, you can have a vertical, and I'm doing air quotes, dungeon, where the creatures that live there are like perfectly comfortable climbing and walking up steep staircases and things, but the PCs might not be comfortable with that. And so your stone giants may not live on a flat plane. In other words, when you go into their little caves or their little hovels that they have on the sides of the mountain, okay, it might not be a room on a level plane. The rooms might be stacked one on top of each other, and they don't necessarily need to have traditional medium humanoid sized steps or ladders or ledges to go from one place to another, especially if they can fly or levitate, or like goats, they can just walk on very narrow thin crevices, outcrops and such. So for example, maybe the steps literally are like you need to press your back against the mountainside, and it's literally one person at a time, and that might limit where your players can go as the players are fighting off your I don't know, your group of satyrs that live up in the mountainsides. And you're looking at the players and looking at the sweat that's pouring down their necks, and just looking at them and like laughing, like, you do realize I could just kick you off this mountain, right? Like, I know you want to steal my stuff, but like, okay, here's a foot in your chest. They're armored knight. I'm just going to kick you back down into the other PCs. Also, there's the idea of playing with some spell effects too, right? So for example, let's bring up the spell, D&D spell, the grease spell. Now, some people feel like if you create a grease spell, you're actually creating grease. Or maybe there's like a spell that, like an acid arrow spell, or a web spell, or entangle spells, or things that create things. I don't know, even fireball and lightning bolt count somewhat in what I'm about to describe. But now we have to take into account gravity. And of course, you don't want to get too deep in the weeds with this, but hey, if something goes up, it's got to come back down. So a sm- dumb and smart, dumb, that's maybe not, inexperienced and very intelligent and brilliant player characters, as well as some of your creatures, may use that to their advantage. For example, a stone giant that throws a rock at a player may not even need to throw it. Maybe they look at them like a, what is it, the pinko or plinko machines, or pinball, and just take a rock and literally just let it roll down. And if it misses one PC, there's maybe a chance that it smacks into the chest of another PC and knocks them off the mountain. Although a smart player character may try to do something like a lightning bolt aimed, let's say they are below a number of creatures above them, that PC could shoot a lightning bolt specifically to target maybe a rocky area above the creatures, and have that rocky area crumble and then tumble down upon a number of creatures above them, so that it kind of gets them in a big cascade. So that might be a threat as well. Also, there are any number of hazards that maybe the creatures could create. For example, let's go back to that tentacle creature in the river or lake or what have you. Maybe that tentacled creature lives down there, and the PCs have to climb up, the narrow valley that's there, almost like a cliff face, or maybe it's a double cliff, big narrow cliff face. So it's on both sides. And the threat may be not only fighting something that's maybe flying around their heads, or existing, attaching itself to the side of the mountain, like maybe a big giant spider, but it also could be the fear of like, okay, yeah, we're fighting the giant spider, but if the giant spider, if I don't want to get caught in the spider by the spider or the spider's web, but that's a whole lot safer than falling down 100 feet and being gobbled up by a tentacle monster at the bottom of the river-filled valley, right? Or crevice or fjord or whatever it's called. So that's also like you can make compound threats with creatures and things of that nature, especially if maybe there's a community that uses giant spiders or uses spiders in general. So maybe they carry like backpacks around with them filled with spiders, or they use spiders of varying sizes, maybe in the lower regions of the mountains where it's not so frozen, and the spider's web itself is cultivated, so they use that as bridges to span some of these peaks and such, and especially making some really cool locations for your PCs to fight. Maybe they have to cross tall plateaus and spires, and maybe the spires are attached by bridges, and so they have to cross the bridge to a spire, with another bridge cross to a spire. Matter of fact, look up a ton of you can look up a ton of fantasy art, and invariably there are these tall castles built into or on the sides of mountains and such, and you see those tall spires where you have the bridges that span these deep valleys and such. And so maybe the PCs have to span those. And of course, here comes the obligatory adversary swooping by, the giant rock and giant eagles and griffins, maybe trying to snatch them into the air just for a split second and dropping them off the edge. Or the PCs maybe trying to leap off of a bridge and land on a rider and kick the rider off and then take control of the griffin. Or it could be maybe you as the game master like giving your players a ship, a sailing ship, and being pirates. Maybe you give them um, flying mounts temporarily because someone needs help up into this mountain region. So the PCs get a little bit of the wow, this is cool because I'm riding on a Pegasus, and hey, I got a Griffin, and hey, riding on a giant eagle. And so they're flying up into high mountains, and then they realize that they're not alone, that they're not special snowflakes anymore, and that there are hordes of things flying and jumping and leaping and swinging and grappling them into this aerial region and such. And so you could maybe have a flying chase through mountain passes, a la trench running from, I don't know, pick any number of TVs and movies and such that have the idea of flying through narrow passes and curving around spires and such to get where you're going. And you could have some random events happen there where maybe there are, from rock slides to tall, very thin plateaus that might tumble on top of them. And then when they get there, there's maybe I don't know, you could go above the size of a stone giant maybe and reskin yourself like a storm giant or cloud giant that's just like built into the rock and confronts them, swinging at them and trying to grapple them in the air while the PCs try to dodge around this giant creature or something. So you could have some fun with that. And you don't even necessarily need to make that a high level adventure. Maybe you just want to do a little twist, a twist in your game. And sure, there's the idea of the argument that of the player that wants to play a first level Aarakocra with first level, they have flight, it breaks the game. Well, again, if that kind of creature is, or that kind of player is a special snowflake and there's only one in the entire world, sure. But if the players have to go up into a community of them, that means that the flying Aarakocra up in the mountains isn't any special than anybody else. And then the other players might be like, yeah, we're going to die because none of us can fly. Rickard says, let's not forget that great cats also have mountain varieties that don't care about the steep inclines of the mountains. So all your cat or best-like monsters could be reskinned to work just as well. Yes, all of your... Well, first of all, you're absolutely correct. Your average house cat walks along ledges and doesn't think much of it. Having them live in mountains, the large cats living in mountains makes perfect sense. Your pumas, your panthers, I believe there are certain mountain areas where tigers and lions live as well. And you can go even further with your saber-toothed tigers, your displacer beasts, those cat and bast-like creatures living up there. I absolutely agree. And they may be the predators that go after those rust monsters, eating the tasty morsels inside of those rust monsters, although maybe the rust monsters might taste a little earthy, so maybe not. But who knows? But yes, they could very well I don't know, you could, like you said, you can reskin and work as well. Maybe like there's a type of earthy rock cat or something, give it some really cool name, earth panther or what have you. And when it's still, maybe its skin or maybe its outer layer looks like rock, much like the images of a lot of the dire creatures look. So, a dire tiger or dire lion or whatever the case may be, dire cat, feline may blend into the background until it pounces. What's the other one? I can't forget the boulet, the land shark, the bullet. Man, those things living up in mountains would be horrible. Not only do they have a burrowing speed like the purple worm, but they also pounce out of the ground. And normally you think of them. Yeah, Pelora, I hear you. Teleporting monsters are a good point. Yeah, blink dogs. Yeah, all I got to do is blink on your back, give you a little shove, and blink off. Deadman Storyteller says AD&D had an entry on what it was like to eat rust monsters. Did they? I can't imagine that's very tasty, at least to us humanoids. I don't know. Unless, of course, we unless of course if you cut a rust monster open. Although, what would you use to do it though? You'd have to use like sharp wood, bone, maybe. Hmm. There's a way to do it. Sharp rock. You could use some sharp rock to do it, I'm sure. But anyway, maybe flint or obsidian or something like that. Something that like breaks off in the sharp. Uh, because you make arrows, you can make obsidian head arrows. So yeah, I could see a big using knives like that, and maybe the ore that they eat is like opening up killing it, opening it up an oyster shell, getting the pearl out. I don't know. That'd be kind of. I never really thought about that. Anyway, so those predatory cats could be something that maybe many of the sentient creatures that live up in the mountains fear, just because maybe they're not able to domesticate them like humans have domesticated cats. Maybe they're just too wild and too feral, and they could be a great hazard. And it could be the PCs maybe to induct them into this tribal region that lives up in the mountains. Maybe they are expected to do things like to prove they know that the lowlanders have a fear of heights. So maybe there are a number of challenges that they give the PCs to, such as like a leap of faith or climbing a certain very difficult region of a mountain face or something, or uh, climbing up to a certain area and retrieving a banner or a flag or a sigil or a medallion or whatnot. Or whatnot. Um, Plur said, had to Google what rust monsters look like. Not too much of a hipster for D&D. Damn, they're ugly. You know what? Side note, rust monsters, the image of the rust monster came about from little plastic toys imported from Japan that the creators of Dungeons and Dragons were trying to come up with monsters for the game, and it just happened to be a plastic toy with a little spinner on the tail, and they just created it on the fly. So no, the rust monster literally has no. I mean, today it has an ecology, but when it was created, it's not from mythology. It's not from any culture. It was just created by the guy. They were just like, we've got a bunch of toys and let's make up some stuff to go with it. And lo and behold, that's what it was. So yeah, guys, we're coming upon the hour mark, so we should have already hit our best ideas by now, since it seems to be the last 15 are the best. But anyway, using your creatures, especially when you're talking about mountains, combining like your earth creatures, your subterranean creatures, you could still have a lot of fun with your aerial creatures using that high altitude to their advantage. Not just using a monster, but using a monster in its appropriate environment. If you're oh, that's right. Forgot to say hi. DBJ was playing guitar while you were explaining everything. Uh, Oh, it's Mifkin Dogs, bro. Hey, what's going on there, man? Well, how you doing there? It's perfectly fine. Long as you guys are here, you don't need. I mean, yes, I appreciate you guys popping in, but I'm just here to blab and talk and hash things out with you guys and just whatever. Bollocks, baby. That's right, dog. Bollocks. Thanks, dog. So well, I did bring up Blink Dogs though. Dire wolves living up in the mountains. Man, you could have a lot of fun. Just how to explain this? Like creating different environments up in the mountains, so that it's not just cliff faces and cold weather, right? We talked about the lakes, but I'm sure depending on what elevation you're at, you're going to have yourself some wooded areas. You're going to have yourself some lakes and waterfalls, and like I said before, with volcanoes, maybe you have some volcanoes or geysers, or when the weather changes, you might have some freezing rain and lightning and such, and different creatures might be at different elevations. In our own world, when you go to places of different elevations, even places that aren't as tall, You will have different kinds of maybe foliage, living creatures that live below a certain elevation, maybe only high as 300 feet, and then above from 300 to 1,000 feet, there might be a different ecology, and from 1,000 feet above that, you may have a third ecology or fourth ecology, and maybe the conflict comes upon these mountainous creatures when they mix with each other's ecology, especially if they need something. So, for example, maybe your stone giants live in the middle ecology, like they're not quite in the cold area, but they really don't come down to the lowlands, and so maybe they go into the higher region to for a particular reason, and then go into a lower region for a particular reason. But that's where the conflict starts. Rickard said, best idea for me today. I'm thinking of putting together a monster version, like your environment, some custom monsters by geographic area. Yeah, I think that's probably underserved. And again, I'm using that term underserved in terms of creating a number of a number of thanks, Bollocks. Um, a number of geographical creatures, like you're saying, like monsters in geographic areas. A collection of monsters just for the desert, a collection of monsters for mountains, just subterranean. I mean, we love ourselves Underdark, so there's a lot of subterranean creatures, but specific, like just aquatic, just maybe coastal, maybe river, swamp, rainforest, like those regions. I absolutely positively agree with you, dude, that you could probably do half and half original ones and then reskin a ton of them. Lizard folk are a perfect example of something that I feel perfectly is a perfect example of something that very easily reskins itself. Lizard folk in the desert could be like sidewinder snakes, whereas lizard folk in mountains could be rattlesnakes, maybe lizard foot, or cobra like you could really play with them a little bit, maybe mix them with some dragonborn, some troglodytes. What are some other Sahogan? I don't know how to pronounce them. Anyway, mixing them, so, like doing a family creature. So I'm with you there. Yeah, yeah. Bog says, "We're spreading the good vibes to all of us in chat and you, bro. Thanks, thank you very much." Deadman, he posted a link on the Discord. I'll pull that up in just a minute. Pelor says, "Damn, now I've gotten into a spirit creating mining accidents. Could get some cool mythology about that." Yeah, when we do subterranean, we're going to get into like natural caves and like mining operations and things happening there. Maybe the problem with mining operations, maybe somebody releases something that shouldn't have, or things trapped down underneath and trying to get to the mining operation. Especially if those bullheaded dwarves finally. Maybe somebody in the dwarven culture finally is like, look, we need help, and I'm going to go get us some help. And they're like, no, we have too much pride. They're like, no, we're going to get some help. We're going to get some adventurers to help us save some of these people. And in real life, we've seen a number of mining operations that have gone bad and people trapped underground. Turn the volume up to 11 in like your fantasy or sci-fi worlds, and that could be a great environment in and of itself, especially if the PCs are trying to save people's lives or excavate something, maybe a lost treasure or whatnot. At the same time, there are like biological hazards, creatures attacking them, oozes and flying creatures and things tunneling underground and stuff. That's actually kind of cool. He says you may he says that's right. You may not exactly hear my guitar, but the vibes translates through the web. In my opinion, emotion transcends space, maybe time. I'm feeling it down in my nether regions. I think I feel a little tickled down there. Thank you very much. I will pass on the vibes thereof. Ricker says, I would say that Underdark and Subterranean aren't necessarily the same thing. I absolutely agree with you. As a matter of fact, when we talk about Subterranean, we might get into a little bit of that too. Don't believe you me, despite the fact that I like talk out the side of my neck. I love doing research on a lot of this, and sometimes it's a fine balance between complete fantasy, just something just made up off the top of your head, and the facts of what an environment is like, and then meeting them together and making it gameable. So yeah, I've done a lot of research in, because I've been writing the wetlands and writing subterranean as well. And I mean, there's so many different things from around the world in our own world that if you just take it and just tweak it just a little bit, it makes some amazing things. And I absolutely agree with you. There is a difference between Underdark and Subterranean, and there's a lot of layers mixed in and of itself, because the Underdark is almost a world. It's almost a plane unto itself, as opposed to literally going into subterranean places. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Rickard also says, was more thinking for fun, so the underserved factor didn't really factor in. Yeah, no. I'm picking with you, but I do agree. Like, you can't have them. They're not going to make 1,000-page monster manual of every creature reskinned for every single region all the time, because you're going to get a lot of people who will balk at it and go, well, it's just a cash grab, because all they did is just reskin 18 of the creatures for the desert and just reskin those same 18 creatures for the mountains and stuff. You're going to get that kind of argument. So you're not going to get you're not going to get every single type of troll and then every single type of goblin for every single region. But I think we could do that. There's nothing stopping us from doing that. So yeah, having I like the idea of kind of where you're going, Ricker, in terms of, yeah. And Ricker says reskinning is also not super thematic. Yeah, I agree with you. Although it's kind of strange, because hell, we could probably do a whole week on the art of reskinning, and I don't know if that's technically an art form, but reskinning itself, because we're at the end here, so I'll diverge. Just I will squirrel. I'm specifically squirreling away. So guys, thank you very much for joining me, but I'm just going to go into a little bit of a reskin thing. So thank you for joining me for Monster Monday, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about reskinning, because it probably doesn't deserve a week long kind of thing. Maybe not, but if I talk it out. But reskinning is one of those art forms where there are a number of ways you can do it. And one way of reskinning, the simplest way of reskinning, is just to rename something. So, for example, you could reskin something in world and reskin something out of world. So, for example, let's go back to lizard folk, right? Your lizardmen. So your lizard folk, you can reskin and basically rename not just the typical lizard folk, but you could reskin Sahogan, Dragonborn, troglodytes, and go even further, go towards ogres, trolls, maybe bugbears, and just call them lizard folk, right? So you could take other lizard type creatures uh, and just call them lizard folk. You can also reskin them in world. So your average farmer sees something with lizard skin on it and calls it a lizard folk, even though it isn't, right? So a green dragonborn walks across the field, and the farmer points and goes, there, well, that's what I'm talking about. There's a lizard man right there. And the PCs are like, that's not a lizard man. They're like, yeah, it is. It's got green scales and he's walking across my fields. That's a lizard man. So in world, you could say people can reskin things, right? A bugbear might be a troll to commoners, because they think anything that looks humanoid and monstrous is a troll. So what is that? An ogre? Yep, it's a troll. Is that a bugbear? Yep, it's a troll. Now, the other way of reskinning something is to completely erase the name and just use the stat block by itself. So, for example, we talked about mountain cats, and you could reskin the land shark, the boulet, the bullet, and then make it a feline. And so not only are you just changing the name, but now you're changing exactly how it looks and its ecology. You're still using the same stat block, but then you're just using a different ecology. So that's another way to reskin. So, for example, you wanted to create PCs go into a tavern and there's the big muscle bound bully in the corner and you don't have any stats. So you just go, I'm going to use the stats for an ogre. And then you just describe this guy as like being big and tough and burly, and he's 7 feet tall, and he's the bully of the town, and he can pick you up by the scruff of your neck, and he's not really an ogre. You're just using the stat block from an ogre. Now, you can go pretty far with using stat blocks. For example, let's take trying to think of some. Okay, if you want to go very, very far, um, you could take a dragon turtle and reskin it as a steam-powered dwarven tank, right? Pelora says, I liked your older video about BBEG's Big Bad Evil guys using creatures as spells, elemental stalkers, etc. Yes. One of the problems with fighting a big bad, right? You get the I'll do a little bit of that for this one too. So you have yourself your big bad guy, right? Standing on the throne room, having his arms out, his or her arms out. I'm going to kill you all. You got 5 player characters, and let's roll initiative. And 5 characters launch attacks at this thing, and it gets 1 attack back, right? Pretty much a recipe for your big bad getting destroyed. But let's say she's a wizard or a vampire lord or a lich or something like that. And you could reskin the quote unquote spells she casts as actual creatures, increasing the number of creatures that are actually fighting the player characters, splitting their attention and just making it look like spells. So instead of it being a fireball that she shoots out like 3 or 4 fire elementals. You're just describing them like fireballs that they swirl and swoop around or something like that's essentially what Pelora is talking about using creatures as spells, right? So the creatures don't actually have you don't give them a face and an intelligence per se, but you use the stat blocks themselves as the thing that's fighting the PCs when the PCs come up. So, for example, let's see. I'll name her Dextrix. Dextrix, the evil wizardress, is trying to break open a portal to the elemental plane of air and become some storm sorceress or something. And she goes, Rickard says, so like summon monster, not a little more ephemeral than summon monster. So it's not necessarily the big bad summoning monsters. They are summoning spells. So let's say Dextrix, the evil storm sorceress, is at the top of the mountain and she wants to open up to the elemental plane of air, and the players are being buffeted by high winds before they attack her, right? Those high winds, instead of just being an obstacle, air quote obstacle, like, oh, you have disadvantage because the winds are blowing, instead making them like 4 air elementals that are buffeting the players as 4 air elemental creatures that the PCs are perceiving as her using her wind spells or powers to buffet the player characters. So now, mind you, as you're describing this, you have to describe to the players that the winds are such that the player characters could fight them. And that takes a little bit of it takes a subtle hand to weave this in. So instead of 5 PCs against 1 wizard, it's 5 PCs against 1 wizard and 4 air elementals, constructed as if she's using the winds and lightning to strike them. And as a matter of fact, I would reskin a fire elemental as an electrical elemental if I don't have the stats for a lightning elemental, right? I would just take a fire elemental, turn the damage from fire to lightning damage, and I'm done. And so maybe bolts of lightning are striking from the sky, and arcs of lightning or ball lightning are shooting through the player characters, while the storm sorcerer is trying to open up this portal to the plane of air so she could become one with it, and then cascade down the mountain. Maybe she's trying to destroy the mountain or whatever the case. Doesn't matter what the point is. The idea is using reskinning monsters as the quote unquote powers of the creature they're fighting. For example, a vampire lord could have, you could surround a vampire lord, of course, with yourself some wolves, some bats, and then maybe some shadow demons as just shadows. You could reskin some giant eagles, maybe as super huge giant bats. You could reskin a vampire or a wizard with telekinetic abilities. You could reskin an invisible stalker as the telekinetic abilities of those of the big bad, and that's what I'm really trying to get at with the reskin. So, and of course, me, you can reskin traps, you can reskin spells. Reskinning spells is like a pastime for everybody. My magic missile, are butterflies that are just like razor sharp, and my magic missile are like just silver orbs, and my magic missile are skulls. Why do we have to stop there? We just reskin the whole rest of it, and as long as the stats are the same, it's not a big deal. The tricky part comes into balancing certain things, such as like damage sources. Damage sources are a big tricky thing. For example, changing a fireball into a psychic ball is pretty unbalancing because there's far less resistances to it. But if you go the opposite way, if you go the way of something having more resistances to it, I would never stop anybody from reskinning it. It's just a thing for players, and for a game master, there's nothing stopping us reskinning anything either. So anyway, guys, that was my that was my squirrel. That was my my segue into, let's talk about something a little bit different. That might, I don't think that could last a week. I might do like an individual video about that as well. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for joining me. Kind of powered down there, kind of like petered out a little bit. Oh, sorry. I think I will. Yeah, I'll do it. Arctic Blasted Lands. I'm going to pull out some books here. Boom, boom. Let's do that. All right. So I pulled out. Hey, Plur, take care. Everybody have a good one. By the way, Critical Hit Publishing. I am one of the contributing writers. This is my baby here. This is the Arctic Lands book. And we have ourselves, of course, Blasted Lands, all about like volcanic regions and such. And the aerial reaches. Yes, there's a book all about the environment in the air. And there is a mountain book. Kind of hit on all of those, I think, today, which wasn't really my intention to do that. But yeah, just wanted to talk about that. And we're coming up with some new things. Now I'm finishing. I probably need another 10,000 words or so for Wetlands coming up. Eventually, all of these books will be put into one compendium. So one big hardback thick book. I can't wait. I'm not sure exactly how many pages it's going to be. It's probably going to top 300 or more, just about the environment with a bunch of added stuff. So yeah, that's going to happen too. So anyway, guys. Hey, Kitty. Yeah, I know. Got to get ready to go. Guys, thank you very much. Everyone have a great one. I will see thee tomorrow. We're going to continue our talk about mountains. Tomorrow's tips and tricks. And we'll probably talk about maybe some a little more mechanical things, talking about climbing, athletics, acrobatics, modulating your environment. How far will people fall? Using some of those skills, doing failing forward, or succeeding with consequence, and using a little bit of that as well, and how to do that in terms of, instead of like pass fail maneuvers as well, when it comes to climbing and navigating around mountains. And of course, you can't forget your rock slides, your falling debris and all that kind of business, mudslides and that kind of thing, avalanches and all that kind of business. So we'll talk about that and kind of how to incorporate them and maybe come up with some ways to not make it monotonous as well. So anyway, guys, I'll see you tomorrow. Everyone have a great one. Thank you. Take care.